Finally a way out. What happened to me? I was just fine.
Thank you. Will take that? I will make a contract with you.
No. This is mine. Give it here.
How naive of you. Goodbye.
Booze. This guy was able to get up after something like that. He's crazy.
Once upon a time on Earth, a tree with a golden glow took root. He was given the name Yggdrasil, and at one moment it grew greatly to unprecedented sizes and embraced all living things around it. And then it created a new world that was based on different game genres. Thanks to Yggdrasil, a world called the Labyrinth was created, which was fraught with many different mysteries and secrets. The people of this world called it in their own way, namely the game of God, although not everyone could become a player in it. After all, there were also ordinary hard workers who worked hard, and at that moment they were warned through a bullhorn that if they again took anything without asking, they would be immediately fired. Not all employees liked this statement. Instead of nicknames, everyone had their own number, and one of the workers, after finishing work, came up to 7,017 and said that he had worked hard that day. He also added that they had not had nice things for a long time, so he offered him to buy this thing at a very good price, namely this tiny data transmitter. But the worker immediately warned that it was not made from real data, and there was a small risk that it could be detected. But this did not mean that it was less effective. But this was not of interest to 7,017, and he simply pushed the worker and left without having said the words, which was very disappointing to him, but he still understood that this guy was just an unknown newcomer. They often told him in his back that he was exactly the same as everyone else. Usually after work, 7,017 walked the streets of this unusual city, which were full of homeless people who did nothing but ask for food. Here's a guy approaching a random box store, opening the door of which one could hear the dissatisfaction of visitors with words that their points should be returned to them. Inside, people spent time playing slot machines in hopes of winning prizes. The guy came there to also play, because this miracle machine gave out everything that existed in that world. Her name was Radnum Box. After the guy approached her, she greeted him and recognized him as an unknown player. 7,017 knew that legal games attracted people because, with their help, you could get rich quickly. That is why he decided to try his luck. SS Rank Account Creation Card. After being asked if he wanted to spin the 10, the guy immediately decisively said that he was ready, because this was his only hope. With ringing music and bright animation, the prize began to fall out in front of him. N. Rank Toothbrush. And since the guy was not interested in it at all, he simply continued further. Time passed, and the unnecessary objects that he knocked out filled the space behind him more and more. Over and over again he failed, because all N-rank items dropped out. After a while, he managed to win even an R-level prize. But that still didn't interest him, because he would only be happy to receive an SR or SSR rank item. The guy couldn't even remember how many times he had already tried his luck, but he still hoped to knock out that very rare item. What was just before his eyes was his mother, for the sake of which he tried everything to knock out this object. Suddenly, for a second, his eyes froze from incomprehensible sparks, all because a very bright light began to emanate from the random box. He could not even think that the same SR object could be in front of him. After all, the chance of falling out was 1 in a million. This is exactly how colorful the box with that coveted SSR prize looked. The guy was shocked that it was SSR in front of him, because at first it seemed to him that in front of him was an SR rare item. Previously, he thought that he would never have been so lucky, since it was difficult for him to imagine such a miracle even in his dreams. And yet, thanks to his tenacity and perseverance to solve the matter to the end, he was generously rewarded. A card that allowed you to create an account. In the magical labyrinth Yggdrasil, that's where he could use it. And there was only one way for him to gain access to that place. This is to use your game account avatar to get into another reality. An avatar was a virtual body that never appeared in the real world, but this method was the only way to transport objects from the labyrinth to the outside world. And objects of the virtual world that go beyond its reality are what changed their world, after which the shuttle service became completely dependent on Yggdrasil. And the players leading his era were important representatives of society. But this qualification was not given to everyone, but only to a limited number of people. Therefore, the guy ran as fast as he could with joy. After all, he managed to get the opportunity to become a player, and now he could start all over again. All he had to do was register his account in the central zone. Suddenly, while he was about to do this, he woke up on the ground. He didn't understand what happened and why he was lying there, and at that moment there were still sounds that some people were asking their boss if this was the guy. The boss said that this was exactly who they needed, because in front of them was the lucky one who pulled out an SSR item. But his people believed that maybe the guy was unlucky after all, because they managed to catch him. One of the jocks said that it was indeed the one who was able to create the account, and he thought it was a good catch for the evening. The boss himself was surprised because previously he had only seen this in lists, but now he was glad because the card became his, and now he could accomplish what he had long wanted. Suddenly, the guy at his feet uttered words in which he demanded the return of his card. The boss told this stranger that he was a liar, and this card did not belong to him, and then he asked his guys to do their job. And even at such a difficult moment for the guy, he still continued to demand the return of what belonged to him. But the boss's people were completely lenient towards him, and never gave the desired answer to this guy. But this did not stop him from continuing to demand and stand his ground. At that time, the boss's guards wondered, was this kid really planning to start a new life? The boss told him that if he bought something from someone else's store, he should pay a commission. Placing his finger on the guy's forehead, he sharply began to give out a magical impulse, after which he added that he had made an honest deal with the guy. And for the fact that he took the card, he had to transfer 30,000 points to this guy's account. And then the guy was doomed, because he understood that this thing could only be knocked out once. The boss said that the transfer of funds was completed, and since the guy accepted it, from that moment on he could do what he wanted. After that, the guy decided to lie down for a while. At that moment, in the background, I heard these people who did not understand what had happened with the weather, and were also deciding the moment with a festive banquet in honor of receiving a valuable item. Suddenly, for a second, the guy moved his hand. Then the jock noticed something else and told his boss about it. He reported that this guy still hasn't learned his lesson. The boss was most surprised that he was able to get up at all after this. At that moment, the guy received a warning that his vital signs had decreased, so he should quickly visit the nearest medical facility. But he ignored it, and only continued to look at those violators who had thus exchanged his item. Watching this, the boss did not understand why this fool behaved this way. Perhaps it was not enough for him. But suddenly the guy turned away from them and began to go to the random box store, which greatly surprised the boss and his employees. They suspected that he was once again planning to knock out an SSR rarity item, which was impossible. They shouted to him in the back that they wanted to make another deal if he knocked out another card. The jock was wondering what they would do if something happened to that guy, but the boss believed that nothing would happen to them for this, because the guy was not an influential person. Meanwhile, there was still a sign in front of him that said his vital signs were low. At that moment, he really didn't feel very well, to put it mildly. Walking to the store, he felt dizzy, and all the people around seemed to blur. But no matter what, he was still going to take what was his. As soon as the machine gun greeted him, an awkward moment happened, because the guy was knocked off his feet. However, his hand still continued to reach for the start button. He pressed the gotcha button over and over again to do it again. But then he became disheartened when he saw more and more unnecessary objects in front of him. There was still a warning in front of his face about low indicators that did not lead to good. Suddenly, the boss was covered by a bright flash of light that came from the Yggdrasil tree, which surprised him because he did not understand what was happening. Due to the emergency situation and the critical condition of the owner, extreme life-saving measures were taken, and then the forced transformation of characters began, after which the system asked to enter the character's name. The guy found himself in pitch darkness and stood as if before a court, which surprised him. He did not understand why he was handcuffed because there were no crimes on his part. Then a voice from the darkness said that he was expelled from the guild for leaking confidential information. He was angry and began to make excuses, saying that this could not happen and that they had confused him with someone else. But from the darkness, they only heard the words that the court had found him guilty, so they wanted to deprive him of such a legendary title. Suddenly, the guy noticed that something was wrong with his voice. The two ghosts who appeared congratulated him and said that this was only the beginning of his unknown life. The guy thought it was unfair and wanted to challenge this decision because he didn't do it. All he could think about was that he should have earned enough money to pay for his mother's operation. Suddenly, a voice from the darkness told 7017 that it was time for him to wake up. In the blink of an eye, the guy suddenly moved through time. He didn't understand what was such a bright and at the same time wet place in front of him. 7017 considered it some kind of fantasy and still didn't understand how he got there in the first place. Suddenly, a system appeared in front of him, which scared the guy. Nevertheless, it asked him to enter the name of his character. The guy was stunned to see this thing flying, and he assumed that it was a robot vacuum cleaner. What was wrong, and she considered it a rude statement in her direction. She said that she was the Yuguan random box system, after which she congratulated the guy on becoming her master. After all, 7017 was the only one in the world who was able to obtain the UR rank. Hearing this, he was shocked, because earlier the guy thought that the rarities of gacha were limited only to the ranks N, R, SR, and SRR. But as it turned out, this was completely wrong, and he was the only one who found out. The system reported that at the moment he was between reality and the world of Yggdrasil, and the reason she needed the master's name was to complete the registration and gain access to the labyrinth. The guy knew that to register he needed an avatar created using a game account, and that this limit of human technology had nothing to do with him. The system said that due to being a master in a critical condition, she had to use her power to help, and now he was in a state where his body had been voluntarily transformed to access Yggdrasil, so she again asked her master to enter her character's name. The guy still couldn't figure out whether it was a dream or if it was all really happening, but no matter what, he realized that this was his chance. He finally entered his name, which sounded like Ryuki, after which the setup was completed and a bright glow appeared in front of him again. Then, the system notified that they were going into the labyrinth. When access was opened, Ryuki saw that same labyrinth with his own eyes for the first time, the expanses of which were extraordinarily beautiful and were called a fantasy world. For the first time in a long time, the guy felt a pleasant breeze on his hair, and also solid ground under your feet. He was incredibly happy, because the simulations on the monitor that he saw could never compare with this landscape. Immediately after such a pleasant moment, the guy noticed how a bunch of ghostly skeletons were moving towards him. Ryuki certainly didn't think that upon arrival in the new world he would be greeted like this. He began to run, because what other options could an untrained guy have? And he considered it an ugly act on the part of the system to throw him onto the battlefield like that. Skeletons were the first level. They meant undead, whose body no longer existed, but anger seeped into their bone marrow. But they were still weak to physical attacks. Nevertheless, for Ryuki, it was a disaster, and the guy began to call for a status window, which appeared and asked the master not to upset him, because it was too shameful. Ryuki wanted to know about the weapon because he believed that it should have come with him when he became a player. The system reported that the master was not a specific player of the labyrinth, so his other systems, including this one, were not applicable to him. In other words, the guy simply could not get his level, status, and much more from the fantasy world. Having learned about this, the guy did not understand why everything worked so strangely. The system said that this labyrinth was on a completely different level, and here you had to spin a random box to get something. Having entered the Yuguan system, the guy read the rules, which stated that if you log into it every day for a week, you will be given one SR level ticket. She also said that in the fantasy world, the speed of issuing items has been increased. From the achievements of UR Yuguana, had one completed task for which he was entitled to a reward in the form of a ticket to the labyrinth, and among the accessories there was a reward of 5 tickets. And just for completing this registration, the guy received as many as 105 tickets, so he immediately began to use everything to increase the chances of getting something rarer. He really wanted to believe that the weapon would fall, because behind him was an army of skeletons. Suddenly, a bright object appeared in his hands. Delighted, Ryuki stopped and told the skeletons to attack. He hoped that their bones would be used for broth as ramen. But suddenly one of the skeletons easily broke his object, which was obvious, because he had an N-rank toilet brush in his hands. The guy was so carried away that he didn't even look at the item that fell out to him, and was upset by such a setup from random boxes. He blamed the system for everything, because it was its fault that there were so many unnecessary items in the boxes. But the system was only surprised in response. It itself did not understand how, being at UR rank, it was possible to pull this off. She considered him a failure. While running away from enemies, the guy still continued to open random boxes, and he again received a strange item in the form of an N-rank wig. By the way, this was a good way to hide your bald spot. And while Ryuki was focused on the loss of a valuable item, the system could not help but warn him that he should watch his step. Unfortunately, she said this a little late, and the guy was slightly hurt. Meanwhile, ghostly skeletons had already managed to overtake him, which almost made him happy. Unexpectedly for him, the box next to him began to emit a bright glow. This was exactly what he needed, an R-level short sword, with which the guy immediately began to defend himself. After so many attempts, he was glad that he finally got something normal. Now he was no longer going to run away, but immediately got down to business. Ryuki was more than confident that he could defeat everyone without having any experience in sword fighting. But the attacking skeleton didn't think so when it pierced his shoulder, which surprised the guy because he thought it should have worked. He understood that the skeleton's health was worth killing in just 2 blows, but the strength of the short sword was not enough for that. The system decided to remind him that the master could not use the labyrinth system, and such a combat ability, like health, was no exception. The guy was becoming more and more disappointed in the system, because it had already said everything at the wrong time. He didn't understand how, given such a wonderful chance in his life, he could end his journey like this. These thoughts did not encourage him. On the contrary, they only motivated him to win. Even the fact that he was driven into a corner could not stop him. Therefore, he repelled the attack and was determined to deal with everyone. Suddenly, something surprised him very much. Namely, that a bright radiance appeared behind him, which was a skill. And then Ryuki realized that with the randomness of the boxes, skills could also drop out. But he was confused by the fact that they did not exist in the fantasy world. He received Parry SR, a rank that could be used to parry attacks. And the swordsmanship skill was SR, a rank that meant that by equipping the skill one could master swordsmanship. trip. The system is always on time. She said that this random Yuguan box was not subject to any system restrictions. In other words, even skills could fall out. Then the guy thought that he could be lucky because anything could happen. This was his first time using the sword parry skill. A wig fell off the skeleton, which he was so worried about that he tried to catch it. But he no longer needed this, since Ryuki sawed him in two with his attack. And this, by the way, was precisely with the help of the sword mastery skill. The guy was stunned that he was the one who could freely use skills that were not in the existence of the labyrinth system, because he was allowed to ignore its laws and restrictions. For the first time, the system praised him and said that this is exactly what the balance of Yggdrasil looked like. She was surprised and said that she did not doubt him from the very beginning. After all, he was the person who managed to obtain the UR rank. She also said that he managed to receive an SSR rank item on the first day. Now a smile finally appeared on Ryuki's face, because luck was on his side. Therefore, he no longer worried that another mistake could happen at that moment. Meanwhile, behind him, there were already several skeletons attacking him. Turning around, Ryuki decided to take the chance of a new item and defeat everyone in one blow. It was World of Phantasm is abbreviated as WAP. Where was the masterpiece of the gaming industry from the game production company Ratira, the goal of which was for absolutely every player to take first place in the labyrinth? At this moment, Ryuki was still fighting the skeletons. And then a magical core fell out of one of them, which, by the way, was not immediately noticed by the guy. And having already defeated everyone, he began to be content with his first victory. The system reported that there were 7 killed skeletons, of which as many as 5 magic cores fell, and also that the experience points earned were converted into RP, which meant random box points. The guy didn't quite understand how it worked, and then the system said that they were used instead of experience, since the master did not yet have a level system. Having counted, the guy was surprised, because for one skeleton they gave 150 RP, and he destroyed as many as 15 of them. Then the guy remembered that he had the last box left, from which the SSR level card fell out. Each time Ryuki was more and more surprised, and then the system became curious whether the master still could not believe in this reality. After all, if it was so much for him, then he was unworthy of such a reward. Ryuki said that he wanted this box to be closed for a while, which surprised the system, and she wanted to know why he decided that. At that moment, the guy thought about the fact that he could destroy his guild with such power, and until then he decided to keep this power a secret. A system edition was released that offered him to increase his sword skill by using his 700 RP for this. The effect of this activates when he reflects an enemy attack. The rest of the guy's skills were at the entry level. Since Ryuki had 700 RP skill points left, he thought that he could take a detour to meet the skeletons again. And he was right, since there were twice as many of them there as last time. This time he was glad to see them, because he wanted to quickly upgrade his skills. Time was of the essence for this guy when it came to fighting. This time he really got the hang of it in battle, because from the outside it looked terrifying. During this time, the system reported that it was the 3rd day of logging into WAP. He managed to complete many missions, such as defeating 10 monsters, performing a gacha spin, and getting 10 items dropped from monsters, for which he received tickets from all missions. He realized that time in the labyrinth passed 10 times faster than in reality, and it was only 7 hours, during which he managed to get 1,500 RP, which he considered a pretty good result. The system was pleasantly surprised, because the master managed to get 10 gachas in a row at the training ground. And all this time she was buzzing like a robot vacuum cleaner that he had acquired the gacha. At that time, Ryuki was already thinking about the fact that he needed to increase the level of his sword skills, and that he should also improve his parry. Suddenly the system cried out in surprise from a lack of understanding of what the master was doing. She simply couldn't believe that he would spend his precious RP on some skills, to which the guy replied that the skill system was also his ability. Afterwards, he became curious. What was the probability of the appearance of ranks? And then the system gave the following indicators. Rank N, 70%, rank R, 27%, SSR, rank 2 and 7%, and SSR, just 0.3%. Suddenly, Ryuki started complaining by showing the results of all his tickets that he had received recently as a reward, and they sucked. But the system only asked the question that he managed to win SR and SSR with the help of the first tickets. The system began to ask its master to give her the points that the guy had earned so hard because she needed them more than tickets. The guy only replied that there were enough tickets to open a new box. The system then asked how long he planned to stay in this forest. After all, since the area was a training area, the quality of the monsters killed was low. The guy replied that he needed a weapon, and his skill levels were not sufficiently upgraded. And he was proud that he knew more about WAP than anyone else. Therefore, Ryuki believed that he should have used all his information to level up in the forest, since there were opponents corresponding to him there. But there were also disadvantages because this zone was one way, into which the guy could not return if he left the forest. He was curious to see how far he would progress without adjusting his level and status, and he also mentioned that he would be able to get an SR rank ticket for a more serious mission. After some time, the guy received a 7th-day bonus for entering in the form of 1 Yuguan ticket SR. Ryuki wanted to finally level up, so he found another skeleton and defeated it. By that time, his skills were as follows. Sword control had increased to the 3rd level. Parrying was exactly the same as breaking through an attack, but the temporary improvement in reflexes was only at the 2nd level. Ryuki believed that this was the limit of the skill that he could achieve there, so he thought about proceeding to the next stage. The system reminded him that it was time to open a new random box, with which the guy agreed. Still, he believed that it was just his luck, and he hoped that when SR was confirmed, some ordinary thing would not happen to him. When opened, the box sparkled so brightly that its light filled the entire space. Ryuki assumed that in front of him was something incredible, which could be called a WAP pickup truck. He got an SR-level sword pistol. The type of such weapon was bayonet, and in the guy's opinion, it completely destroyed the worldview of this game. He immediately began putting it into action to see the power it was capable of. As it turned out, with one swing it was capable of destroying a tree whose trunk was huge. Even if we take into account his skill, the guy considered the weapon quite powerful, and he really liked the fact that the blade was long, because it was difficult to fight in the past. Suddenly he was very interested in the question, what would happen if he died there? If he transforms his body, will anything happen to him in real life? The system replied that if something happened to the master, he could be revived using a backup copy of Yggdrasil. However, she warned in advance that this process was very painful. Hearing this, the guy was happy, and this so-called process did not frighten him at all. After that, he said that he wanted a gacha for all the remaining tickets, as he wanted to improve his combat power. This time he got something that could be used. It was a set of R-grade leather armor. Suddenly, Ryuki decided to ask because the system skipped his training and immediately threw him into hunting. In its justification, the system said that it was a training platform, and although she made a mistake with the coordinates, she sent it to the system, which the guy considered fair, and since he was already more advanced, he asked the system to record all his gaming achievements from that moment on. She wondered if he had the desired name for the files. Then the guy said to call it The Story of the Escape of a No-Name from the Depths of the Sea. But he wondered, what was the purpose of the first video? After all, Yggdrasil created a labyrinth more refined than the originals of which he absorbed. Although most of the Ratia games were mass-produced and were full of all sorts of nonsense, and they talked, that it was a worthy job concerning this place. While walking, the guy remembered something. Namely, the boss of the second half of the game could appear in an early area, which is exactly what happened, and this giant appeared right in front of the guy. The system reported information about the enemy. It said that in front of him was the Dark Knight of Chaos. After he received the blessing of the demonic god of chaos, he was expecting the strongest opponents in his tower. The system gave the guy a mission in which he had to kill this ghost of the Dark Knight, as a reward for which he could get 10 Yuguan tickets and 1 Yuguan ticket SR rank. This was unexpected for Ryuki, but he even liked it because the experiment began from that moment. Suddenly, the Demon Knight introduced himself in a menacing voice and said that he was looking forward to a strong man, after which he attacked the guy because he was interested in what he was capable of. Thanks to such an unusual blade, the guy managed to resist such a strong opponent. Then he remembered that he had a parry ability, which was already at the 3rd level. Then he confirmed his theory that if you successfully parry the blows, you could ignore the difference in attack power and level. And although he had such an unusual blade and abilities, even with such skills it was difficult. After all, this was not enough, since this was his first meeting with such a majestic boss. He didn't understand why his attack didn't work. After all, it seemed to him that he was able to do this if the system did not influence him, and then he began to think about how it was possible to break through his defense. The system noticed that this was an excellent guess, because the master could ignore the correction of the WAP system. The guy was confused, because he believed that this could not be effective. Saitama suddenly became furious, and began to tell the guy that he was stupid, and then asked him to think a little about the idea that overtook the master. Ryuki wondered if his blade could compete with metal armor. Then a thought struck him. He realized that he had made a mistake by thinking only about the strategic moments of the game. When he was once again attacked by the ghost of the Dark Knight, he realized that the labyrinth was a world created for a game motive, and that the system would have affected an ordinary player but not him, because he was different. While fighting, he still wondered what if these guesses were correct. Then, he should have aimed at hard-to-reach points that were the weakest. Having realized that this guy was up to something wrong, the Dark Knight began to attack even harder. The guy only had to reflect this strong blow. Suddenly, due to the crossing of blades, a spark was formed, which gave the same fuse to the additional feature of the guy's weapon, with the help of which he attacked the ghostly Dark Knight, which was one of the strongest blows during this battle, who deprived the ghostly Dark Knight of his limbs. Having suffered, he could only sob proudly. The guy knew that in the labyrinth health was the system. In other words, being a Yuguan player, the guy wouldn't say that it was it, because damage could be caused to the enemy himself. And if he aims at vital points, then he could not only wound the ghostly knight, but also defeat him with one blow, if he had more strength. The system warned the guy that it was dangerous, after which something stuck into him. He was not ready for this, because the guy did not expect that the Dark Knight could have long-range attacks. Turning around, he noticed that an ominous energy was emanating from his limb, the same one that pierced him. Here the Dark Knight said that demons were ferocious creatures that posed a threat to God. After which he wanted the guy to taste his despair. Dark matter began to emerge from his wound and from his limb, which surrounded the guy on all sides. Due to not knowing how to deal with dark magic, the guy only had to dodge. It was then that the guy realized that this was a bad idea, because the Dark Knight was the boss of the second half of the game, and it was impossible to defeat him during the training. Moreover, if you die in that place, it will be impossible to return. After all, even if the player's level increases, he still cannot return, which means he could not win. Moreover, no one has ever seen the second phase of the Dark Knight. At this time, he had too many attacks to parry. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the system realized that its master was in danger. After all, the Black Knight pierced him with his dark matter. Screaming and hitting the table with his palm, Ryuki couldn't believe it. He talked about how again someone rejected his strategic plan, and he couldn't understand what the problem was that time, because he was an expert analyst of the Lindsay Guild. The director then looked at the strategy manual he provided, but he knew that Rinfel had previously rejected it, to which the guy replied that it was much more effective than before, so he wanted it to be accepted. Throwing him the strategy guide he had provided, the boss told him that he was not even a player, but an ordinary ranked person, so he should have come up with something better. Ryuki realized that the recapture did not suit his boss, and then he accepted the fact that this was the will of the ace of their guild. But he suddenly became angry because he was sure that the boss would not refuse Rinfel, and then he decided to throw out his anger through his fist beating on the table. After all, he could not understand how it could be that there would be no recapture, and then he realized that he should no longer obey Rinfel in everything. First of all, he was going to calm down, because he needed to earn money for his mother's operation, so he began to correct the management records, believing that the guild would promote him for this. Suddenly, someone crept up behind him and whispered his name. This girl scared him, but she didn't want it at all, because she just brought him coffee, because she thought that this was what his tired look needed. This girl's name was Cynthia. She was a researcher at the Lindsay Guild. The guy was very grateful to her for her care. The girl noticed that he was editing the manual, which was rejected several times. Cynthia believed that he paid too much attention to him, which worried her, because she was worried about him. And she really wanted to help with this, but before that she asked if he was against it. Delighted, Ryuki showed the last part of the strategic manual, but since it was very secret, she had to inform her superiors about it and request materials for the required part, which the girl didn't mind doing because she had a desire to help him. She was even glad because it was a good reason for communication. The guy asked his mother not to be surprised because she had finally been given a date for the operation. She was surprised because she didn't understand where the funds for this came from. Ryuki replied that she did not need to worry about it because at that time his strategic plan was accepted. Hearing this, his mother was very happy. The guy said that it was all thanks to Cynthia, after which they hugged, and his mother told him that she was incredibly proud of him. Ryuki told her not to worry about anything anymore because their efforts were rewarded. Previously, the guy was told that he was being fired for a crime related to the disclosure of top-secret guild information, which is why he was fired from Lindsay. The guy was surprised and did not fully understand what they meant, but his superiors told him that all the evidence was collected despite the fact that he acted very cunningly, and if Cynthia had not reported this, no one would have noticed. Hearing her name, the guy was very surprised because this girl wanted to help him. Suddenly, one of the people expressed his dissatisfaction with this meeting because he did not understand why they were wasting time on this. This was the same Rinfel Darius who was the deputy of the Lindsay Guild. He didn't think that at this meeting he would have to meet with Ryuk, who constantly published guides that irritated him wildly. After all, Rinfel always wondered who this fool was, since he almost went crazy when he saw the last publication. Afterwards, Rinfel told Cynthia that it would be inappropriate for her to communicate with such a guy, and he also added that, as he had promised earlier, he would be his support, after which he invited the girl to celebrate this matter. Approaching Ryuk, Rinfel said that he did not understand the essence of his work at all, but if he was really an analyst, then his analysis was terrible, and for this he should be fired. He also said that he knew that the guy was talking behind his back, and he was very surprised by his courage, because with the help of it, he created an entire leadership. But Rinfel wondered if he had neglected his duties. That was all, and he told Ryuk that he was going to celebrate because his dismissal was a good reason. After all, he lost his rank and became a no-name, for which Rinfel congratulated him. It was then that the user authentication began, where he received an unknown name under a regular number. It was believed that the suspect agreed with all the charges, and for this he was deprived of his earned titles. In the battle with the Black Knight, the guy remembered all this because he had nothing left, no status, no name, and only the title of SRR, level. The Black Knight was curious if this guy could withstand his attack. When he grabbed his dark matter, he wondered, where did he get his powers from? But it didn't matter to him what kind of power it was, because the guy didn't. He couldn't prevent it, he was sure of that. Watching the Black Knight attack Ryuk again, the guy had a question. Was this the end? And would his story really end like this? And when the dark matter approached the eye, he told himself that nothing had changed in his life because he still had to shovel it all out. Remembering his promise, he understood that everything could not happen just like that. And that very betrayal on the part of Cynthia, which he could not come to terms with. And even at that moment, he was attacked by the strongest Dark Knight. He resolutely said to himself such words as, he was going to rise from day one to the top of everything. After which, he jumped up and grabbed the Dark Knight's head, and he thrust his blade into this ghost, fleetingly remembering how Rinfel told Cynthia that she should not communicate with him, which he really didn't like because what he did was extremely inappropriate. Therefore, having awakened the power within himself, Ryuki promised himself that this Rinfel would receive what he deserved for what he did. His defeats in his past life helped him cope with such a powerful opponent. After which the battle reporting system surfaced, which reported that for the Dark Knight's motives he received 15,000 EXP units, which were converted into RP, as well as the Magic Stone and Knight's Armor and SR Ticket Yuguan. Before disappearing, the ghost of the Dark Knight recognized the guy as a strong man who had defeated the darkness, and for this he wished him to go only forward. The guy told the knight that even if he had simply remained silent, he still had no other choice but to move on. He saluted such a strong opponent, after which he disappeared. At this time, the guy was already being watched from another place. One of the people was curious, when was this fight video uploaded? Then he received an answer that a few hours ago they had this video, and also a counter question. Did he want to know who this person was? But he replied that this was not necessary, since the identity of this guy was known to him. Instead, he told them to keep an eye on this guy, and then asked where Rinfel was. This man was Gabriel Darius, master of the Lindsay Guild. People were surprised by the video that came out the same day, namely, that No Name was able to defeat the Dark Knight, and they considered him a complete madman. It also shocked them, because no one had managed to do this before, and they didn't understand how an ordinary guy could defeat him. People even began to doubt that he was really a real knight, and it was easier for them to consider it some kind of bug. They were puzzled by the fact that in WAP, there was a parry ability and a weapon in the form of a sword and pistol. And although there were still similarities, they were different, so they considered it nonsense. And yet, despite this, they accepted the fact that the Dark Knight had been defeated. They then wondered if the training area was badly damaged, and they thought that if after all this was not a mistake, then everything could be explained. After all, it was just a toy, and the time initialization and other fake bugs should be fixed for the most part. Watching the video, they didn't understand how it was possible to explain this guy's reaction speed. Then Ragnar, a second-level analyst of the Lindsay Guild, found information that this guy was previously known under the usual number 7017. She prided herself on being an analyst, but with her knowledge, the girl was unable to fully understand this video, namely, that only 2 hits were enough to defeat the boss. No matter how you look at it, the word error in this form was unacceptable, and she believed that the best solution was for the guild boss to contact this player, but the other analysts did not like this idea. Then the girl was outraged that the elder objected to this, but he explained that this player was certainly not bad, but still he believed that it was impossible, and there was simply an error on his account. Then analysts came to Rinfel Darius to talk about this player, but when they heard his name, they couldn't understand who it was. Then people told him that this man was an analyst for their guild Lindsay 3 years ago, and it was then that this guy created a very detailed strategic plan. After all, this was the same no-name who was fired from the guild at his request. Rinfel, in turn, said that there were a lot of such people, and based on this meager information, he could not remember him. Then the elder said that a video was uploaded of this guy defeating the Dark Knight of Chaos, and he saw it in person. Then Rinfel said that it was just a mistake, because there were no problems in using bugs to defeat the Dark Knight. But the elder only repeated once again that he had expelled this guy, and that meant... But then Rinfel interrupted him, saying that it didn't matter to him, and he also didn't understand. Since when did the elder begin to care about such trifles? After all, this guy was the most ordinary no-name, And he also added that such people were a waste of time. Listening to all this, the headman didn't even know how to respond to this. Here his people were interested in what they would do. Then the headman said that there was a high probability that this guy was trying to lure them into a trap with such a demonstration, so it was worth treading carefully. And he decided that for now, they should just observe the situation. After all, it was not urgent enough to act in a hurry, because even if they collect information, they will not lose anything. But when he left work, he was worried about his stupid brother, because he spent a lot. At this time, the system informed Ryuk that physical recovery had reached 87%, and at this point it offered to take a break. But the guy just started complaining that he was in pain, and he thought that he couldn't cope with the dark night. After all, he had serious injuries and wounds. The pain was the same as in reality, but he believed that he should get used to this, because he would constantly experience a similar feeling when fighting such powerful ghosts. After some time, the guy hit the road, and now he could calmly say goodbye to the training area and move on to a more serious place. He knew that this world was built around the core content, and the tower in front of him was a demonic god. At this stage, Ryuki understood that he would not get there because first he had to conquer various dungeons to prove his abilities, which was the main goal. The system didn't understand why he would release the video so quickly. After all, it was too dangerous, as it attracted enemies. Ryuki said that he knew about all the risks, but he had his own plans for this. The guy was sure that people considered it just a mistake, which was not uncommon in games. Talking about the UR rank was a mistake. And even if they act, the head will start by collecting information, and the guy suspected that the head of the guild will suspect that this is a trap. After all, unlike Rinfel, he was a cautious person. The system was curious by releasing the video. Was he trying to confuse them? Then the guy said that this was exactly his plan, because the more attention he received, the more he limited their capabilities. In addition, he believed that if the transformations that the system told him about were true, then it was possible to hide a physical body in the labyrinth and use the capabilities of UR. After all, he found a way to crush Rinfel Darius, and all he had to do was lure him into the labyrinth. After all, if he notices him, he will definitely want to come for him. It was only necessary to incite him a little, and at that moment Rinfel appeared. This will be a great chance for Ryuk to deal with him. The system invited the guy to play gacha so that they wouldn't get bored on the way, and besides, Ryuk had accumulated a sufficient number of tickets. And in total, there were 20 Yuguan tickets, and 2 tickets for the SR rank, and there were also 15,000 RP points. The guy informed the system that upon arrival in the village, he would need to leave the labyrinth every 10 days for safety reasons. After all, the avatar, the body of the master, was a different technology, because the physical player remained in reality, and there was danger for him. And conversion was a method of transferring the body itself, so there was no need for such low-level concerns. Then the guy realized that his body was real, and not an avatar as he had thought before. In any case, the system informed him that since it was obliged to perform the conversion in an emergency, it was recommended that he return to reality. What the guy was thinking about, of course. But since the recommendation was from the system, he accepted it and moved into reality. He returned to where he was last, which was the random box store. It was then that the system jokingly invited him to spin the random boxes again. Ryuki found it strange that he didn't feel any pain after what happened to him the last time in the world, but the system reported that all these were the privileges of the rank UR. Afterwards, she said that a couple of hidden cameras were installed in the store, which few people knew about, and she suggested that he block them, but the guy only thought about it. At that second, the door opened, from which people came out who were glad to meet this stranger again. It was the same boss of this establishment who was surprised that after everything that had happened, the guy still looked good. He wondered where he had been hiding from them all day. Seeing these bad guys, Ryuki was not very pleased because his previous meeting with them almost cost him his life. The boss said that thanks to the cameras he was able to get there quickly, because he was still interested in the fact that the guy had knocked out something valuable from a random box. But before they could finish speaking, the people told their boss that the guy had decided to run away. The system wanted to know why the master was running away, and Ryuki said that this was obvious, since it was unlikely that he would have been able to cope with 10 bandits. Then the system asked him to plan a route to avoid a bad outcome. She said that at the next corner he should have turned right, and then he should have walked 100 meters and turned left. The guy wondered, should he have trusted the system? Suddenly, running away along the safe route of the system, Ryuki was shocked, because he came to a dead end with high walls on top of which there was barbed wire. Ryuki was angry and wanted to teach the system a lesson for doing this to him, but she began to run away from him, saying that there was a good reason for this. At that moment, they were overtaken by bandits who were curious. Had this guy finished his marathon? The gang boss said that after so much effort he managed to disappear yesterday, and he was wondering how he managed to do it. Realizing that the bandits had driven him into a dead end, the guy did not know what to do in such a situation, but they told him that they wanted to take back in an amicable way what he had managed to knock out of their machine guns. Ryuki understood that from the very beginning they wanted to get Yuguan. Then the system told him that there was a wooden sword on the left side. Ryuki was surprised and did not understand what she was talking about. The system said that, unfortunately, he did not have any special items that he could call into reality. But despite this, she brought him to that place on purpose, because there were weapons there, and she wanted him to take this wooden sword. Ryuki was indignant because he did not understand where this weapon belonged, and what he was supposed to do with this stick. Suddenly, a magical glow began to emanate from the wooden blade, which the guy certainly did not expect. Seeing that the stranger was about to fight with these bandits, it became funny. A big guy stepped out in front of them and told his boss that he could handle this guy himself. While attacking, he asked the no-name not to be angry because he was only at him. And when the guy threw his stick like a boomerang, which flew to the side, the big guy began to mock. Suddenly, she came back and dealt a serious blow, after which he fell to the ground, and everyone else was surprised that this guy managed to cope with this jock. The gang boss didn't want to waste any more time, so he ordered his men to take what he needed. Ryuk was only amused by this, because he realized that he could use his skills from the labyrinth, namely, wielding a third-level SR sword and parrying at the same strength. He realized that no matter how lucky he was, the chance to use the skills in reality was a great cheat. The bandits didn't understand what happened, and how did the guy turn out to be so strong? After all, he is an ordinary no-name. They were already starting to dislike this mission, which made their boss more and more angry. And then he raised his voice at them and told them not to let themselves be deceived. He didn't care that this guy was so strong. He believed that they could take him in numbers, so he ordered his men to defeat him. He considered this guy too impudent. He assumed that the guy became so strong because of yesterday's things. Well, since they were black mambas, they believed that no name could not compare with the ruler of this territory. When suddenly he heard the screams of his people, which led to misunderstanding. He only heard cries for help, which were terrible. Meanwhile, Ryuki was already dealing with the last bandit. With such strength, the guy felt great, because before in the real world he was an ordinary weakling, and now he had delusions of grandeur, SR-level ball skills which gave him increased ball proficiency and improved his ability with a one-handed ball. When the guy took this stick, he felt a surge of strength and skills that he used in the maze, and this conversion was completely different from ordinary players. After all, he managed to transform his body and not the avatar, and if he becomes stronger in the labyrinth, then this will be reflected in reality. The boss told the guy that everyone he left had something in common, because yesterday he took away his right to create an account. He would not forgive him for this. So he told his people to attack him again and take away what should rightfully belong to him. Well, this time this attack was not crowned with victory, since everyone who decided to attack the guys got what they deserved. After which the guy said that the next one would be the boss, who helped him a lot yesterday, while the boss himself tried to reach his weapon to attack the guy. The boss started waving him in different directions. He was restless and already asked the guy not to come near him, just let him get away from him. In turn, the tricks were easily repelled by his weapon, which he certainly did not expect. He was able to achieve this effect using his level SR parry ability. The guy didn't understand what this boss was saying, because his subordinates were attacked, and he believed that, as a boss, he had to take revenge for them. Well, he asked the guy to leave him alone, after which he suddenly reached for his weapon. The guy didn't think that the boss would decide to give up so quickly. He assumed that he would decide to take his weapon, so he blocked his hand in advance so that he could not do anything. The boss didn't like that this guy was so devaluing his ability because he was a black mamba. As soon as he attacked him, the guy immediately repelled his attack. Ryuki said that it was funny when you felt a surge of power, and he was curious if the boss felt the same way when doing this to him yesterday. After all, having defeated them, he felt relieved, because before the guy was in the same place. That day, the right to create an account that they took away was his only hope, which came to him when he had nothing but despair, so he promised that he would take away his hope just like he did to him. The boss told the guy that if he indulged in this way, he would have problems. Well, it didn't matter at all because all he needed was for the boss to shut up. At that moment, he began to cry, and he asked the guy to sit with him. Well, no matter how it was, Ryuki decided to repay him in the same way as he did. And having come home, the system was curious why the master did not get rid of these people, because it was dangerous and they could not take revenge on him. Then he told the couple that it was very easy for him to deal with them, but he didn't want to stoop to their level, so he simply suppressed them with his strength, and now they won't bother him for a while. Then the system realized that fear and cruelty were human weaknesses. Ryuki asked the system if it had done anything with these bandits. The system confirmed this and reported that it had interfered with their internal seed structure and manipulated the visual part of their boss. Pants was surprised that the system was capable of this. Then she said that this operation only worked when the person was mentally ill, and she believed that the boss saw her master as a terrible monster that he could not defeat. Now he felt fear, and she was sure that he would not want to go against him. Still, Ryuki believed that he should have completely hidden the existence of the system, because if the whole world found out, it would turn upside down. Then the guy decided to take out his sharp folding device. He was pleasantly surprised because even with it, he could use his fencing skills and related skills were learned intuitively. which was pretty good, because a weapon with a long range was inconvenient to carry. He decided to inquire about Yuguan, and then the system said that the master originally lived outside of Yggdrasil, and despite the fact that at this time he had no side effects, for example, accelerated aging due to the influence of Time Labyrinth. Having heard this guy, he said that he had assumed this earlier. Then the system said that if this flaw was still present, then such a rank could not be called UR. Sometime later, Ryuki met with the bandit leader to begin action. The guy assumed that modern technology helped him recover in just a few hours. What the leader confirmed was that he was surprised that this no-name called him despite what he had to go through. The guy suggested that he paid for his treatment from the money he received for the right to create his account. Hearing this, the leader got scared and said that if it was about that amount, then he asked to give him time to reimburse everything. He hoped that the guy would be less lenient with him this time. Ryuki said that he was still alive only because of his whim, and asked not to forget about it. And when the leader said that he understood everything, then Ryuki informed him that he needed help, to which he replied that he was ready to do anything, after which they both went to the red light district, which was not particularly known for its luxury, since there were many beggars. The leader of the gang knew this guy named Goro, who had just been begging, and he had to drive him away so that he would not interfere with them. Coming to a place called Yorozuya Tenko, Ryuki asked if they came there, to which the leader replied that they had come correctly, because everyone was using this place for illegal transactions. Then the guy decided to make sure and ask if he sold the right to create his account here, but in response, the Bantha leader only bowed his head and muttered something. Inside, there was a man who carried out all the operations, who was happy to welcome new clients to his place. Ryuki was surprised that he seemed to be a young guy, but the voice was like an old man, and he asked if he was the owner of this store, which the guy confirmed and introduced himself as Ju Tenko, the owner of this Yorozuya, who was wondering what this stranger was looking for in such a place. The system informed Ryuk that this owner's body was non-human, and it was trying to capture basic information about this player. Then the guy understood why his voice was so strange, but he believed that facial expressions with the whole body were prohibited. Then, Ju Tenko said that it was a rather expensive model, but he still managed to purchase it. However, he found it funny that the guy was talking about the law with a black market dealer. Since Ryuki had not previously answered his question about why would they send it there, he said that he wanted to know what happened to his right to create an account. Tenko did not understand why this guy needed such information. At that second, listening to the entire dialogue, the gang leader was scared and began to grind his teeth. Ju-e Tekenko understood everything and said that the right to create an account was an extremely unique offer due to its rarity, but he said that, unfortunately, he had sold it a long time ago. He wanted to know if the guy was interested in anything else, and then Ryuk, upset by the sale of the account, said that there was something else. The guy said that he came to him to trade with goods that needed to be sold. Then Tenko said that he was ready to look at his proposal because he was involved in various sales. He couldn't wait to look at his goods in the bag. How a friend's face with a smile suddenly changed into a surprised look, all because he couldn't believe it. That I saw in front of me a full bag of magic stones. Ju Tenko didn't understand whether the guy didn't know their true value and decided to bring them to him. Ryuki asked not to mock him just because he was a no-name, because it was an elementary thing and he knew its value. Artifacts from the labyrinth were divided into two types. The first included those that cannot be used in the real world, and to the second, objects that materialize in this world. Magic stones were a special artifact from which ether was extracted, and the higher their rank, the more pure ether could be extracted. Due to this, the social status of the players also increased. Ju Tenko said that this was why it was difficult for him to understand the guy, because the best solution was to sell the stones legally rather than through a black market dealer. To which the guy replied that he did not want to sell them publicly because he received them himself. Ju Tenko thought that it was stupidity that No Name managed to get magic stones. Looking at them, he said that it was time for Luca to go home, which made him surprised and did not understand why they were driving him away. He began to be indignant about this, because he did not want to leave in the most interesting place. But Ryuki was not going to miss the opportunity to sell stones because of him, so he insisted that he leave the counter. But since Luca did not immediately understand him, the guy had to kick him out. Ju Tenko admitted that at first he thought that he was an ordinary guy who was lucky enough to steal magic stones, but he asked for forgiveness. After all, being a no-name was normal, but recently something deviating from this norm has appeared. Ryuki didn't understand what this merchant meant. He said that he did not think that the sensational hero from the video would appear at his stall, which was unexpected. After all, he did the impossible by defeating the Dark Knight. Therefore, Ju Tenko was glad to greet the guy whose name was number 7017. And he said that if he was trying to hide his identity, then he needed to be more careful, and also about this magic stone. It was called the World of Fanaticism. This stone fell from the Dark Night of Chaos. This is exactly what was displayed when evaluating it, and Ryuk was the only one who defeated this boss in the tutorial area due to a mistake. Therefore, calling him by name, he wanted to ask again what was the purpose of his visit to this store. The guy admitted that his name was Ryuk 7017, and he appreciated his advice, but he came for shopping, and so he just wanted to get down to business. Togoju. Tenko asked what he wanted from the black market trader. Then Ryuk, without hesitation, said that he wanted a MOD, and he was wondering if there was one in stock. Then, Tenko got nervous and began to speak in a whisper. He was shocked that this guy was talking about such a thing, and he was curious if he even knew what it was. But Ryuk knew that this reduced the complexity of the maze, but it had side effects. The merchant said that most of the mods were cancelled due to lack of functionality and major flaws. Ryuki was sure that this merchant had a couple of them hidden, so he turned to him. The merchant was surprised that even No Name knew that it was a chip that artificially altered the components of the labyrinth, but he had to ask if he had seen the dead man outside his store. Ryuk didn't understand what he was getting at by talking about that beggar. Then he told the guy that the man was a MOD user. Previously, he said that he wanted to experiment with sensory control, so he bought the MOD analgesia, and although it was weak, it increased the pain threshold, from which the result was catastrophic. Although the pain was dulled, the other senses became very sharp, which was what killed him. He even tried to remove all installed mods, but unfortunately, it was too late, since it is impossible to return the feelings back. In fact, there were many more side effects, so the authorities banned its development and completely got rid of the remaining ones. There were a few mods that were tested for safety, but they were publicly available. And aside from the mods, the merchant still had a long way to go with regards to some people. Suddenly, looking through his lens, Tenko wondered about that. That guy defeated the Dark Knight of Chaos single-handedly, which the guy confirmed and said that on the internet they called him a cheetah for this. And whether he was a genius with cheating skills or a simple fool using mistakes, Ryuk was alright, because he was not against any means or methods. He believed that it was better for him to use them than to remain in place without progression. The merchant was curious if the guy knew how to work with mods, but he only asked in response whether he was interested in what would happen next. This was a very good offer, which made the merchant think, and he said that although most of the mods were removed, he was lucky enough to keep a couple. But first, he wanted to make sure that the guy really knew how to use them, so he provided him with a couple of others. Ryuki was sure that they were very dangerous, but he had Yuguan, and the guy believed that he would protect him, and the mod he held in his hand increased the attack power 3 times. The system said that it was terrible, since it was just a simple doubling of the number, which would not bring any effect. Then the guy chose the next one, which could predict the future 1 second in advance. And the idea was good, but Ryuk understood that it could not be implemented. He believed that she could be a liability on the battlefield. The next one was a mod that turned everyone into beautiful ones. The system assumed that it worked on the principle of hallucination deceiving the eyes. Then the guy took a mod to increase all abilities by 1 and 2 seconds. But he didn't like it because it put too much strain on the brain and body. Then he took the next one, increasing sensitivity 3,000 times. But he didn't like that one either, just like the others, which were useless, which upset him. But the next one was a mod for manipulating probability, which he liked because it put less stress on the body than others. Ryuki believed that the person who created him was a genius. After all, the mod made it possible to influence events that could actually happen in favor of the player. And with its help, the probability of all outcomes of Yggdrasil will be 0.305% better. The system also liked this, because the master would not be affected by the decrease in productivity due to the avatar, so the probability could be even 1%. The guy understood that it would be difficult to perceive such a low percentage advantage, but these insignificant numbers could be attracted to the random box. He decided and told the merchant that he would take 3 mods, which did not please the system, since it was difficult for it to believe that his choice fell on increasing the rate of the random box. The merchant, in turn, was happy, because the guy managed to choose only normal fashions from the pile of garbage. But these words that it was trash made the guy think. The merchant asked Ryuk to wait because he misunderstood him, because he did not want to deceive him. After all, he offered clients who requested fashion to take a test. Then Ryuk was wondering if he knew the creator of the mods. After thinking a little, the merchant said that he would give a discount as an apology, and he could use these things that were erased before they even appeared on the scene. Afterwards, the user was authenticated, and the system offered the guy to install the mod, warning that installation was possible only once without possible cancellation, to which he agreed. The merchant wanted to ask one last question. He was wondering if he really could master MOD. Then, what was he planning to do with such power? But Ryuki just smiled, after which there was silence. The merchant fell to the floor because the guy evaporated with such speed that he was knocked over. But Tenko only laughed at this avoidance of the question. Suddenly Ryuki appeared and just said something about the top of the world. which included both bronze and silver. So are gold and platinum called rinful, and he said that it didn't matter whether it was a diamond, which was also called the king, but Ryuki planned to crush everyone who was at the top. This idea sounded very interesting, which amused the merchant, and he said that no name could come to him at any time of the day, after which Ryuki set off on a journey to conquer this world. The system was surprised because it thought that he would have problems due to the fact that he was a no-name, but surprisingly everything went smoothly. The guy was even in the labyrinth, but no one would have thought that he was an ordinary no-name, especially in this village, although it was quite busy there and it was strange that no one noticed him. There were good people there, a lot of sellers in general, the most ordinary village, or not. Perhaps there was something mysterious lurking there. Ryuki thought that this scene looked like something from the Middle Ages because it was so peaceful there. The system was curious. When will the master finally start spinning random boxes? After all, he had accumulated a lot of points. Ryuki was tired of this gambling, and he asked to be patient a little since this could be done at any moment. Suddenly, the guy noticed something strange. Namely, the looks from ordinary workers who had just done this fell on him. The system also noticed this and wondered if the master had done something to make him so closely watched. The guy said that ordinary NPCs hated people because stupid players considered them unrealistic and called them insects. They committed many atrocities, so it was not surprising that the locals looked at him like that. Suddenly, the guy saw a picture of someone catching a local thief. It was a merchant who was angry that this guy had the courage to steal his goods, but he in turn asked for forgiveness and said that he only did it because he was hungry. But he was not going to just let the guy go. And watching all this, Ryuki realized that in this village it was not as quiet as it seemed at first glance. But it seemed to him that the clothes of this thief NPC were not the same as the others in this village. The system said that he was a resident of the labyrinth called Space Alien. Yggdrasil completed this game 3 months ago. Then the guy realized that this game had completely disappeared. Therefore, people traveled to other labyrinths to survive because they had no other choice. He thought it was his imagination, but this place was really noisy, and all because some were unable to adapt to another world. The system said that unnecessary labyrinths were destroyed by Yggdrasil and WAP and could wait for the same to be taken into account. Then the guy realized that they should have acted even faster. He knew that even if the game was completed, before that moment he would be able to destroy Renful and Lindsay. After a while, Ryuk managed to find a place to stay for the night, and then the system again became interested in the fact that they could play a gacha. But the guy said that the first thing they should have checked was MOD, and then the system checked and reported that the merchant had not lied, because the probability of random boxes had increased. The percentage of N rank decreased, while for the rest it became higher. From a low of 0.3%, the chance increased to 1%, and although the difference was not great, the guy was pleased with such indicators. Since Yuguan had been waiting for this for a long time, Ryuki suggested that he play the gacha. The system shouted that there were 40 regular tickets and only 2 SR level tickets, and there were also 15,000 RP points. And with such a quantity, there was a high chance of dropping an SSR level item. The guy wanted to start with 40 regular tickets. But imagine his surprise after opening all the boxes. After all, from such a heap he only got rubbish. Which is why he was disappointed, which is probably why he wasn't in such a hurry to open them. He spent 40 tickets and didn't get a single SRI, and the probability manipulation mod sucked. The system decided to joke and said that with this level of garbage he could sell toothbrushes. But Ryuki did not appreciate this, and told this vacuum cleaner that it was better to give him a good item, and not joke so stupidly. But he, in turn, asked him to stop, because it was done for his sake. Suddenly the guy saw 2 rare objects fall out. His face changed dramatically, because it seems that those were SSR items. Now he believed in probability manipulation mods, but the system considered him a dirty fraudster, because it was not good to use cheats. The guy got a new SR level skill called Sprint, as well as an SSR level intuition skill. The guy knew that with Sprint he could move quickly, but he didn't fully understand what the intuition skill did. After all, it strengthened the sixth sense, and upon reaching the Isle, it allowed one to look into the root of the world. This is exactly what the equipment for this skill looked like. Ryuki didn't feel any change at all, other than realizing that this skill had the same rank as the first SSR. The guy wondered if he should have leveled up. After all, 7,000 RP points remained until the next level of intuition progression, which surprised him because it was too much, because for other skills, increasing to the third level cost only 2,100 RP points. The system also thought it was stupid to spend points on unknown skills, and the best solution was to take the chance to knock out another SR level item. The guy began to think that it would be better to spend 100 gacha on improving his skill, but the system tried to dissuade him, because RP was a rather valuable resource that was better spent on boxes. But the guy made a decision and immediately increased all his skills 1 level higher. Now swordsmanship was at the 4th skill level, and 1 attack boost was added. Parry has also been increased to level 4, and an increase in temporary effect enhancements has also been added. The new sprint skill had improved to the second level, and now the instantaneous movement at high speed was 14 meters, and the recovery time was about 16 seconds. The guy still had 8,730 RP points left, and he was thinking about the fact that it was possible to increase his sword skill to the limit of the Yuguan system, or distribute the remainder among other indicators. But then the system kept reminding him that there was still a chance to open the box, and it offered to spend the rest of the RP on this. But he was not interested, so Ryuki raised his sword skill to level 5, which greatly disappointed the system. And this impudent vacuum cleaner simply boiled with anger and fell on the bed, emitting smoke, while the guy was happy with his decision. After which the system reported that the maximum level of sword proficiency had been reached, and that the peak for increasing the new rank had been reached, which made Ryuki happy, because he didn't mind raising his rank at all. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in front of the guy, which surprised him, since he had not done anything. In front of him was a nugget from which a golden glow emanated. Ryuki asked the system to explain to him what was happening. But this stupid vacuum cleaner overheated so much that it was turned off. Ryuk could only guess what it was. Suddenly, the system still reported that upon reaching the maximum level, a reward is given. Yuguan Ticket X5 and Yuguan Ticket X10. And also the sword skills were strengthened to SR plus the level of influence of Yggdrasil, and the skills when wearing a sword were strengthened, and also when using it, it was possible to activate the first level Aura Blade. The guy was happy because he could not even imagine such power as Yuguan. After all, many players could not master even ordinary swordsmanship, but this skill surpassed this skill many times more. That is why Ryuk felt such strength that he had never dreamed of before. And at the same time, the system did not understand why it chose this particular person as its master. After all, she just wanted to see the joy of different boxes falling out. The guy told Yuguan to stop whining, since they had a new business. The system wanted to know where the master was going. Ryuki replied that he was going to the dungeon because Rinfel took first place in it, and he wanted to take his title for himself. Since the master was going there for the first time, the system was worried about whether everything would be okay. Ryuki replied that he knew the dungeon he conquered well, so he was confident that he would not lose to him. At this time, a group of players were already standing at its entrance, ready to conquer the unknown of the darkness that the dungeon hid. The commander-in-chief told everyone not to let their guard down and be ready to defeat anyone. Among them was Ryuk, who did not want to listen to the commander-in-chief and planned to handle everything on his own, which surprised everyone. Then the commander-in-chief asked the guy to wait a minute, since it was not entirely clear to him why he was walking alone. After all, it was a dangerous dungeon, and it was not the best decision to go without a group. But Ryuki only coldly said that he knew about this, after which he began to enter through the portal inside. The group was surprised. They didn't understand what was wrong with this guy. They saw him for the first time and believed that he was a suicide bomber for doing such a thing. Suddenly, the commander-in-chief turned around after the words of his comrade that strange things were happening in this dungeon because no one had been able to conquer it for 3 months. And then he was horrified that this guy went there alone. At that time, Ryuk was beginning his journey into the witch's hideout dungeon. The guy set himself the task of breaking Rinfel's record. Therefore, he unsheathed his blade, which lit up with flame for the first time. This was the same aura of the first level. And then the guy got ready, because it was time to attack the unknown. But he could not even think that from the very beginning he was already being watched. Through a magic ball, and the one who did it loved to catch such self-confident attackers. After all, they desecrated her sacred place for which they had to pay, since this territory was not for them at all. And this terrifying witch was going to deal with him with her own hands. And she wanted to bring it as a sacrifice. This, by the way, was her hideout, where she was the boss. And because the guy entered it for the first time, he received a reward for his achievement in the form of 1 Yuguan ticket. It was difficult for Ryuk to navigate there, because it was dark and nothing could be seen. But the guy understood that in any case, the structure of the dungeon was constantly changing randomly, and the only way to understand its real architecture was to see it with my own eyes. He was curious to check with the system about Rinfel's record. He recalled that it was something like 17 hours and 30 minutes. Then the system showed the guy the rating of being in this dungeon, and he was surprised that the second place after Rinfel was 17 hours and 38 minutes, and the third place was 19 hours and 5 minutes. And then Ryuk was shocked, because it was a big time difference. Since there was a player who got so close to Rinfel, Ryuk was going to remember Arcia from this guild. After wandering around the dungeon for a short time, the guy came to a place that was infested with bats. He knew that these creatures attacked in groups in caves, where it was difficult to maintain visibility and maintain distance, and if even one bites, you could get a debuff, which was a problem. But luckily, Ryuk had a simple solution to this problem. Even the system was unaware of this device that the guy used against these bats. Covering his ears, the guy said that it was a sound device, after which a strong sound wave occurred. Even the system could not withstand such an impulse. Ryuk said the bats were sensitive to noise. The system asked the guy to warn about this next time because she thought that her eardrums would burst. But the guy was perplexed that the robot believed that he had eardrums. He began to kill the bats one after another, those who were not affected by the sound effect. The system wondered, was it too slow for someone who was going to break the record? Then the guy replied that in any case, conquering the dungeon was a long undertaking. At that moment, the guy was worried about something else, because for the last 3 months, no one could conquer this dungeon. The system became interested in why this happened. Then the guy said that the place was famous for its low level of difficulty. After Rinful cleared it, they began to treat it as a training place, but informally no one passed it for 3 months. And yet the system noticed that the guy had been standing still for a long time, and it believed that he was lost. But Ryuk denied this and said that patterns were important in this place. But the system noticed that all this time he had been circling around the same place, and it seemed to her that they were lost. To dispel her doubts, the guy asked her opinion on how many manuals he could write when he was in the company. He said that this dungeon was also in the simulation, and he had seen it over 1,000 times. But the system saw that from that moment they were only going around in circles, and it said that if the master really got lost, he could turn to her for help. But while she doubted him, the guy found another entrance. He also noticed that the third stalagmite had a curved scratch, while previously there were only straight ones. All because changes occurred when you passed this place for the 32nd time, which meant that the path to retreat was clear. Then the system assumed that this was how the master remembered the road. But Ryuki only said that she was too noisy and stupid. The guy said that this magical dungeon was created to make players get lost, so the structure of the cave changed in real time. It was necessary to find the right path using professional skills, so Rinfel included his squad of allies who possessed them. But before discovering such skills, Ryuk had to memorize the paths on the map to conquer it, and according to his calculations, in 5 minutes, they should be at the next point. The system was surprised that the guy could remember all the subtleties, because ordinary players could not even imagine this method, and she assumed that this method was intended for the single-player mode of the game. And she thought that her master was crazy, but then the guy said that he heard everything that this robot vacuum cleaner was saying. Ryuki reported that they would soon find themselves in the labyrinth. There were only 30 minutes left, which took longer than he could have imagined. And he wondered if there were any issues that were worth solving, and this was the reason for the players' failures over the past 3 months. At this time, the dungeon boss noticed that this clumsy and at the same time dexterous invader managed to get into the labyrinth, but she thought he was lucky one last time because she was planning to send him into the depths of despair. After all, very soon at the exit from the labyrinth, there was her death magic, which was located on the floor. And she wanted this guy to be the first to experience her. As soon as Ryuk entered it, the magic immediately began to take effect, which he certainly did not expect. The system wanted to know what was happening, but the guy replied that he didn't know that. But he understood one thing: there was danger ahead. Then he had an idea and took out a spare doll, hoping that it might work. After he threw it, the magical effect began to take effect, and he could observe from the country how it worked. After Ryuk saw the black flame, he realized that it was instant death magic. He was at a loss because he believed that such traps should have appeared in the tower in the second half. But he didn't understand why they were there. The system said that it was unknown to her, but the characteristics of the dungeon had changed, and she recommended that the master leave. The guy did not expect that such cruel traps awaited him from the very beginning. Looking at the other moves, all he could think about was there really no way out? Suddenly it dawned on him that the right path must be a dead end, but it seemed to him that there was nothing wrong with this road, in addition to the fact that it contained instant death magic. But Ryuk still assumed that it could be all because of his new skill, Intuition SSR, which was instantly activated after equipping. Watching the guy, the boss considered him lucky, who managed to save his life on a thin one. But she believed that it was only a matter of time, because no matter where he went, he could not escape her death magic. And she believed that the guy would be scared for the rest of his life. Suddenly, she was surprised because he disappeared from her field of vision, which rarely happened to anyone. But to her joy, she easily found it on her magic ball. But she never ceased to be surprised because by that time the guy had already reached the central hall, and she didn't understand how he managed it, and yet she suddenly became not interested in this because she believed that he could not survive in this cave because she had put a lot of effort into setting traps everywhere there. Suddenly the guy disappeared from her field of vision again, which completely stunned her. Then the grandma boss started getting angry that this guy managed to do such a thing. She found the guy this time in the old laboratory, but earlier it seemed to her that he was in the opposite direction from the central hall. This place was with multiple spells, and although she had no idea what the guy was doing, she was sure that he was finished. But suddenly the grandmother fell completely into a stupor. She considered it impossible that the guy so skillfully avoided her traps, after which he disappeared again. She strained hard to understand where he was this time. And in order not to panic, she decided to activate all the traps at the same time. It was hard, but the grandmother believed that this tomboy had turned into another insect. Suddenly, there was an explosion coming from behind her, and then the voice began to say something about how it was a shame for him to damage such precious material. And then he decided to ask if this was the boss's room, while the ominous grandmother could not describe the emotions she was experiencing at that moment. The system believed that all this was a deception and a terrible skill. The guy didn't understand. Did the vacuum cleaner want to watch him die? When the boss saw this guy, she asked a question about how he managed to get there. But Ryuk said that it was troublesome for him to explain everything, because all he wanted was to deal with her quickly. He decided to name her the boss of the witch's hideout dungeon, but then changed his mind and named her the Lonely Witch Cereal. But holding his blade behind him, he still believed that these names did not suit her. Pointing his sword at her, he bluntly told her that she needed to come up with something less scary. Having acquired her full form, the dungeon boss told the guy that he had started this in vain.